Okay.
That really blurred it. Hey, one.
Thank you.
I should have made it so. And I got your message. And you get your slides because we were working with Tina already to get printed larger print copies of things. Did she send them?
Oh, I did. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I'm starting to have to confess my
That's okay.
my agedness.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Good. Thank you very much. I'll call this council workshop to order. Firstly, I'd like to appreciate the patience of our presenters. Today is Bike to Work Day, and many of our councillors took up the challenge to get involved in Bike to Work. I will say that I did Bike to Work, but I did it yesterday, so I just wanted to get an early start. But thank you for supporting that important initiative. Today, as members of council will know, that in accordance with the town's procedure bylaw, no decisions are to be made, but rather this meeting is an opportunity for council to have an informal discussion regarding various matters. The agenda items are before you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, there being none, then I'll turn this over to Mr. Nethery for the introductions with respect to the municipal energy plan. Mr. Nethery.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Actually, just in the interest of time, I think if I could just call on the regional councillor, who, as you know, is our champion on this project, to welcome everyone, and I'll leave it at that.
Good, thank you. Regional councillor.
Thanks very much. I think it's obviously a somewhat appropriate timing we have here today with the Bike to Work Day this morning, and to be then coming to a workshop on the municipal energy plan. We've met a couple times now as a group. It's a broad cross-section of individuals with a great deal of expertise and experience well beyond mine. And so being part of developing an important plan for the town, I'm also learning a great deal. I would just say that, you know, for council members, we're gonna see this as we go along. I think that this is just, you know, the town is engaged in so many types of planning that we're used to: official plans, secondary plans, strategic plans. It's important that we step into this field. It's encouraged and mandated to a degree, but it's important that we start to think about our role in planning communities that includes planning energy for the community. So this exercise looks at everything from buildings in built form to energy generation and distribution, energy users, land use planning, transportation, and more. And it's really going to be a blueprint for this corporation, but also the community. We did some work in the last term with the Partners for Climate Protection, and we did a lot of internal work, and staff met repeatedly to advance some goals within the corporation. This is a next step and a much larger step. And so I think we're going to have not only a better understanding, but a great blueprint to move forward on. We're going to have to make some decisions along the way as to how ambitious we want to be. But I will say this, and this is my own personal perspective, you know, the challenges of climate change globally are significant, and they are, I think it's safe to say clearly, being the effort to meet the challenge is being led by municipalities and cities globally, before state and federal governments. And so our role in this is important, and every municipality and every city that plays a role to help mitigate this will be handing on a positive legacy for future generations. So with that, I will pass it over to Susan Hall and Peter Zarek to lead us through a little more learning on where this process is at this point and where it's going to take us.
Oh, it's on. Okay. Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to come and tell you a little bit more about the municipal energy plan and sort of where we're at in the process. I'm going to kind of walk through the process side, who's been involved from a high level in the advisory group, and then my colleague Peter Garforth is going to give you some examples from some other communities who've already been through this process, just so you have a sense of what could lie ahead. So do I have to do, it's not on the screen.
It's just not working. Maybe while we're waiting for the presentation to come up, I would ask that we maybe go through the presentation first, and then we'll have questions later. We've got a fairly long presentation, and we've already compressed it a bit, so this might make it more efficient. Okay, good.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to introduce you to the other members of our project team. And as I said, we'll go through an overview of the project, the schedule, and that advisory group, talk about the plan structure. I don't think that piece will be anything new for you in terms of other strategic type documents that you've been through before. And then, as I mentioned, Peter Garforth will talk about world-class energy planning and the baseline data picture that we have so far. And then we've got some time to chat with you, to answer your questions, and to talk about what you'd like to see in terms of desired outcomes for this process. And then just a quick highlight of the next steps. So these are the folks who are involved. So 3 of us are here, Peter Zarek, Peter Garforth, and myself. We are teamed with ICLEI Canada as well. So Megan Meany is the executive director at ICLEI, and Michael Dean is one of the team members working on the maps and the data analysis. And then Jeff, Amanda, and Lily are some of the folks that are helping behind the scenes at LURA. You may see them when we get to some of the community engagement type activities in this process. They're the folks who would probably be involved in those aspects. But the main people that you would see are Megan, Peter, the 2 Peters, Michael, and myself. So just in context, looking at the population now of 86,800 and change, you're looking at growth to 105 by 2031. So we've looked at the year 2031 because that's when growth projections are provided to. And we'll be talking about how does the energy picture change over time, and what are the strategies that we need to be considering given the population growth that you have in your community. There's over 24,000 private dwellings, so this is one of the spots where energy plans focus is on the residential side. It will look at commercial industrial side, but there is a big opportunity in what's happening on the residential side to look at conservation programs, to look at the renewable side of the picture, and as well in terms of transmission and how we get energy to the residential settings. This isn't the first municipal energy plan in Ontario, but I would say it's part of a new wave that is happening across the province. There's been a lot of work in terms of climate action that has been happening. All municipalities and institutions have to go through their own conservation demand management plans, which you participated in. But this is looking at the community-wide, not just town facilities, but across the whole community. And as Peter will say, this is sort of and Councillor Taylor, you said it too, this is one of the chapters that you need to be considering. So we talk about a transportation plan, we talk about land use plan, we talk about economic development planning. This is the new chapter of what's happening in Ontario, is taking a solid look at community energy and developing a strategic plan that would guide all facets of energy, linking it to land use planning and linking it to economic development. So the program is funded through the Ministry of Energy, and the town did receive funding for that program. They have identified sort of 3 phases in their process of looking at stakeholder engagement, baseline data, and developing the report. It's looking at GHG emission reductions and exploring opportunities for the building sector, for economic development, land use planning, generation and transmission, and renewable energy. The timing of this process is an interesting one for all the municipalities that are participating. So there's about 8 municipalities in Ontario that have received funding in sort of what they've called the first stream of funding. And now they're rolling out a second stream where municipalities, it doesn't have a hard deadline like the first round did. But there's a lot of change that's happening just in terms of the provincial energy setting. So there's a long-term energy plan that was 2013, so that's fairly new. Now through IESO, there is the development of regional resource plans, which will be looking at large parcels of regions within Ontario and putting together an integrated plan. And then each of the utilities have their own conservation targets that they're establishing. So there's a lot of things that are happening on that stream, and Paul's here and Jeff is here somewhere. That can answer any of the questions about that side of what's happening in terms of their planning. But we see this as an opportunity to really tie all of those things together, look at what the regional resource plan will entail, look at how we can align this with conservation targets for the utility. And then from your stream, there are linkages within the provincial policy statement. There's it's identified to integrate into the secondary plan process in the York Region official plan. So there's all of these ties from a planning perspective, and it should also be tied to things like your conservation demand management plan and potentially some of the other master plans, whether that be economic development or transportation or the other areas that are tied to energy. So it's not operating in a bubble. It is really within a context of what has been some very moving parts. The integrated regional resource planning process is just happening. The conservation targets, I think, were in was it this month or last month? So this is all within the context of a number of parts that are moving. As I mentioned, the program has these three elements. So stakeholder engagement, which we've chosen to do all the way through the process. We have this great committee who are helping us to talk about baseline energy, to talk about vision and goals, and we'll be talking through some of the maps and involved in the development of the plan all the way through. And the timelines for these are about 2 years is what the ministry has envisioned. So this is our process and the timelines that we have. We've had 2 meetings with that advisory group. We've talked about their role. We've started to talk about vision and goals in a very loose fashion. We haven't got anything crafted yet, but we will be coming back to them with those elements. We've started the conversation on baseline, and we'll share some of that with you today. And then one of the products that the funding framework is looking for are energy maps of where you are now and potentially where you're going, so that you can set some target actions and potentially look at some areas where you want to focus on within your community. There will obviously be actions and implementation strategies in terms of defining the plan. And we have that stakeholder engagement process happening the whole way along. I think we have about 30 folks who are involved in our advisory group. Some of them are local, and some of them are the organizations that are very involved in energy. So we have Newmarket Hydro that's involved. We have somebody from the IESO that's involved, so that because there's these other moving parts, but we've tried to focus on the larger institutions. We have representatives for economic development, transportation, trying to touch off all of the different areas. And I think we've got a fantastic group who've really been contributing a lot already. So we're looking forward to continuing to work with them through the process. So I just wanted to touch on this just so we're all using the same language. So our plan will have a vision. That's going to be the aspirational statement of where you want to go. It will have some goals that will tackle the variety of sort of areas of economic development or generation or conservation. We're going to try to set objectives that are smart as possible, so that are specific and measurable and attainable, that can potentially contribute to more than one goal. And then there'll be a series of strategies, and Peter will give you some examples of those and how they sort of line up together. But for those of you who like to sort of see things in visuals, this is what it would look like. So you'd have your vision, a series of goals and objectives and strategies, and then there would be actions or projects, or as Peter calls them, scaled projects that all move towards this one vision. But the other piece to be thinking about are the policy elements and programs that would be linked into those strategies and actions that would all be moving you towards a common vision. So with that, Peter, I think I'll pass it to you, and you can talk about some of the examples from other places.
Lost it. Oh, good morning, Mr. Mayor, councillors. What I'm going to try and do, and I'll try to respect the time, the original time, if I possibly can, because I think the discussion is actually more important than the presentation, although it's important to get some background. What I want to do in the next 35, 45 minutes is give a little sense of what are the big picture drivers around community energy planning, municipal energy planning, then pick up a few examples not only from Canada but from one or two other places, and then run us through the data which we've gathered so far for Newmarket, and then sort of take us into the discussion. Worldwide, we spend about $10 trillion on energy. Globally, we're looking at a $55 trillion economy. So by any standards, energy is a big chunk of the game. And this is the 150-year picture we're looking at. And there's a certain irony here that if you go back to 1850, we were actually a more or less renewable energy system. We have spent the last 150 years becoming a non-renewable energy system, and now our challenge is how to go back to a more sustainable, cost-effective energy system. The current forecast is the world is on track to, from a 2000 baseline, to be doubling the energy use from 2000 to 2030, so a doubling in less than 30 years. That's a huge realignment of many, many things. You just have to put that into any kind of context. Why is the community so important? As of 2008, more than half of the world's population are living in cities. In North America and Europe, this is 70, 80, 90%. And 70% of all energy use takes place in an urban environment. So frankly, one of the responsibilities of urban leadership is to address the question of energy. Are we using it optimally, economically, cleanly, reliably, affordably? Are we making it accessible to all our communities? There are many, many dimensions of energy which should be addressed at the community level. We're living in a world where, and I could spend easily a couple of hours on this slide in its various details, but we have a very large range of potential risks and opportunities around energy. Energy prices are extremely unpredictable. Canada, as an energy exporter, is as vulnerable to changes in import and exports and pricing as anybody else. Frankly, as an energy exporter, there's always the basic question, if you can sell it to somebody else for more money, why should you use it at home inefficiently? In other words, there is the good business of husbandry. So we've got a major shift in energy use around the world. All of the growth is coming from Asia for the coming couple of decades, excuse me. Climate change legislation is very uncertain. We have energy infrastructure that has been seriously underinvested, and there are significant reliability questions coming up, and so on and so on. So we have a big range of things that can affect price, availability, reliability, and legislative frameworks. I must apologize for my voice. I was sitting on an aeroplane yesterday for 14 hours, and it's showing in the dry throat. Then we come to extreme weather events, and I was just watching the news this morning, and we have extreme flooding in British Columbia. We have extreme flooding in Texas. We've had heat storms. We've had unusual tornadoes. Are we looking at a new normal on climate change? 70% of human-induced greenhouse gases come from the use of energy. The remainder comes from land use and industry, mainly cement production. So energy is a key dimension of any energy plan. So if we take a quick look at where does Canada stand relative to, and I'll just go over to the right-hand side, which is greenhouse gas per unit of GDP. If we index off the USA as the largest North American emitter. Canada actually indexes somewhat higher. Canada generates more greenhouse gas per unit of GDP than the USA. Some of that is due to the industry structure, some of it's due to many other things. But then we look at other regions, European Union 67, Japan 73, China a very large emitter compared to North America, but dropping very quickly as they modernize their infrastructure. So we are seeing a significant opportunity from the lowest to the highest. Then if we look at the Canadian energy system, Canada in total spends about $200 billion on energy. And if we look at that picture from all the fuel on the left, the uranium, the oil, the natural gas, the water going over the dams, going through the various conversion and distribution systems to the buildings and the vehicles on the right and the industries, the green arrow is indicating the energy which is spinning our meters or coming out of our fuel pumps and is what we would call useful energy. The remainder, which is far bigger, is actually the energy we use to run the system. So we have effectively a system that uses more energy to run it than we get out of it as output. This is not untypical. In other words, Canada is not significantly better or worse than other large industrial countries, but it gives you an indication of the scale of the opportunity that if we can rethink how some of those links go together, and in an urban environment we can, then we can start looking at that wasted energy not so much as waste, but as unsold or unused energy, and the trick is how can we get it into a useful chain. If we look at energy per dollar of GDP, so this is energy, not emissions, again we see huge productivity differences between North America and Europe, Japan, and China. Now China, you see 426 there. It isn't long ago that that number was well over 600. So you see China is actually on a productivity increase trajectory, which is relatively dramatic. So again, we see a significant opportunity at the national level. And in the end, each community is its own microcosm of the national level as to how we can bring that. Getting a little closer to benchmarking efficiency, if we benchmark the energy use relative to output. So in the case of industry, how much energy do we use to make a service or a widget? Then relative to North America, relative to the European Union, which is actually the global best practice, it's only about a 20% difference. It's not a huge difference. If we look at vehicles, transportation in terms of vehicle miles or vehicle kilometers, passenger kilometers, ton kilometers, it's about a 40% difference, 1.4 to 1. But then we look at buildings, which is by far the major energy use of any community. We are looking at nearly a factor of 2 to 1. And that is based on equivalent service, equivalent comfort, and equivalent climate. So in other words, you've normalized out all of the differences. So that is a huge opportunity to not so much find new things, but to find ways to adapt known things to a different environment, so which lowers the risk, because obviously new things are inherently more risky than transferring things that we already roughly know how to do. This is the more graphic way of looking at it. When we make a cup of coffee, we need a certain number of calories in the cup of coffee, and very roughly in most energy systems, to get the calories in the cup of coffee, we waste 25% in the urban environment, we waste 70% in the supply chain to the urban environment to get our 5% of calories in the coffee. So we paid for all of that infrastructure. 90 to 95% of it is actually wasted in getting the fuel to the cup of coffee. So the question is, can we find better ways to do things? In my old job, I used to be head of strategy with Owens Corning, which is the Toledo link. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Northwest Ohio. We did this same calculation for insulation. We thought the irony was quite interesting. And actually less than 17% of the primary energy value of the fuel ends up in the product. And that's a pretty efficient process. So in effect, we have a lot of opportunity if we can find ways to improve the efficiency of our supply chains. So why do communities care? All the risks we talked about, reliability, but in addition, it's the community values and image, it's the investment in green jobs, it's managing unpredictable energy prices, and we'll come back to that on the new market data in a minute. It's supply security. If your city is in business and the neighboring city is not, in a period of disturbance, that is a competitive advantage. It is a social advantage. Then future environmental legislation, it's only a matter of time before Ontario has some form of carbon legislation which will put a cost on energy. It's already the reality in other parts of Canada and other parts of the world. Then the managing of weather events, which are likely to be more severe and more threatening to the energy systems. And as you saw from Susan's slide, increasingly, Ontario is actually taking a lead in North America. Ontario is way ahead of most other jurisdictions in terms of recognizing the importance of the municipality as an energy planning unit, as a key planning unit for energy policy at a regional, provincial, and national level. So in other words, we're looking at a situation where something that in the past you could sort of leave to the utility, increasingly is something that really should be in the hands of the community leadership in all its forms, political and other. There's a very wide range of energy performance. These are greenhouse emissions per resident, but there's many other ways of looking at it. But you see, if I go to the municipal level in Canada, we're looking at somewhere between 16 and 17 metric tons greenhouse gas per capita. The USA at the municipal level is a little higher. European Union at the municipal level is well below 10. We get some communities like Holland, Michigan, with emissions per capita well over 20. We get Vancouver down in the 6 metric tons, but Vancouver, of course, has completely carbon-free electricity from hydro in British Columbia. And then we have the worldwide benchmark, which is Copenhagen in Denmark, at 3 metric tons. All of these pictures include transportation. They include all activities within the boundaries of the community, public or private. So in other words, this is not community assets, this is the entire community. So we are beginning to see a few communities in North America tackling this challenge, and they all share some common features. They're fully integrated, so they look at supply, fuel choice, distribution, efficiency, transportation, urban design. In other words, they look at all the elements that create an efficient or inefficient community. They all have embraced breakthrough targets, i.e. they have benchmarked themselves against the best in the world, and they've said, even if it takes us 50 years, that's the road we're on. In other words, they have established a best practice targeting. They don't just look at energy as a technical aspect or a cost aspect. They look at it socially, economic development, and many other dimensions. They're all multi-decade plans, so they all are building in that challenge of any long-range plan in a democracy is how do you create a long-term plan that survives elections? And that is a very fundamental challenge to any energy planning and any other infrastructure planning, let's be honest, which is how do you create a plan that will survive political swings and survive elections? Because you can't build efficient infrastructure by turning it on and off every time you have an election. And they are all globally benchmarked, and they continue to do global benchmarking. If Copenhagen is our benchmark, it's not a bad idea to take a quick look at it. What makes it the benchmark? Well, it was triggered by, in their case, the 70s energy crisis. Copenhagen happened to be one of the few cities in the world where nearly all its electricity came from oil. So they were hit not with the oil crisis, not only in transportation, as was North America, but they were also hit on the electricity side. And they said, never again will we be dependent on decisions, political decisions made thousands of miles away from home, thousands of kilometers away from home. Their first priority was efficiency. They have the most efficient built environment in the world. Their next priority was thermal efficiency, and you'll see how important that is in Newmarket when we get to the data. We heat and cool our buildings. We waste heat in our industries. We waste heat making electricity. The challenge is how can you close the loop and bring that heat into a useful operating environment. So they have very widespread district heating and cooling systems covering 90% of the entire city and suburbs. They are very fuel flexible. They do not get into environmental religion. But still, 25% of their electricity comes from coal. And yet you look at their results, and they are the most lowest greenhouse gas per capita of any major city in the world. In other words, it is the intelligence and structure and configuration of how you put all the pieces together, which is far more important than any one dogmatic view. In other words, it's not all about solar, it's not all about this, it's not all about efficiency, it's all of the above, intelligently assembled and intelligently managed over decades. They have a very good transportation, multimodal transportation concept where every transportation node is a node to other transportation. You know, the bus and the light rail and the heavy rail and the cars and the bikes and the footpaths are all considered transportation network, and they tie together. It has very high value employment. It has the lowest unemployment rate of any major city in the European Union, and in 2009 it was voted the second most livable city in the world. In other words, it hasn't done them any harm as a community to have a very effective energy structure. Then we come to the economics, and this is, I think, one of the most telling graphs, because one of the elephants in the room every time you have a discussion about community energy planning, so if the elephant is in this room, I'll turn the lights on it, which is, that's all very well, but can we afford it? You know, that classic, if you're going to do anything that's disruptive, the first question is, can we afford it? And can we afford the investment? This is the, just look at two curves here. The one that's called GVA per capita, which is gross value added, rough equivalent to municipal GDP. It has been steadily increasing in constant euro terms since 1994. This is the greenhouse gas emissions per capita. So in effect, they have managed energy independently of economic growth. They have decoupled that equation. And if you think back to that picture of Canada, without more than 50% of energy wasted, if you can intelligently and structurally bring that waste into the system, in effect, it's free energy to drive your economic growth. And this picture is just one example of how that's happened. These are a number of targets. They're not all the same year. But you see one of your neighbors, which inevitably will come up in the discussion, Guelph. They started out in 2006. My team worked with them to facilitate their plan in 2006 with 12 metric tons per capita at that time. There have been changes in the Ontario grid since, which have changed that number. Their target, which was globally benchmarked against Stockholm, Copenhagen, and Mannheim, Germany, was set at 4. And they are now constructing their plan with that as their 2031 target. Vancouver's got a target of about 4 or 5. Copenhagen has set itself the goal to be the first carbon neutral major city on the planet by 2025. And there's a few people on Copenhagen City Council sweating a bit. They've made that commitment, and the world is watching to see if they can get there. So their target is, including transportation, to get to a carbon neutral city by 2025. So what are the successful community energy planning aspects? First thing is, it's not about any one thing. Most people have their own view as to what it's about. Oh, it's about energy cost, or it's about environment. It's actually about all three things: competitiveness, security, and environment. And these are typical target areas that any good energy plan would have very specific targets around energy cost for the plan period, employment created by the plan, directly or indirectly, investment attracted by the plan, supply security, quality, and flexibility, which in turn is part of competitiveness because nobody is going to invest in a community with an unreliable system, and then environment, predominantly greenhouse gas reduction. And in each case, it's possible to achieve breakthroughs. It's always difficult using a neighbouring community's targets, but as we haven't formalised the targets for Newmarket, I pulled up the Guelph targets. These were written in 2007, approved by the City Council, and it's their vision and basic goals. And you can see it is all about investment, livability, competitiveness. As you go through that, it is way more than just an environmental agenda. This is a community agenda to make the community more livable and more competitive. These goals will survive forever because at any moment in time you could set your targets against those goals. So the goals are basically very simple, they're measurable, and they're eternal. And they should be reported to the community. Their plan is taking us, number one, they see the community energy plan as a pillar of economic development. In other words, it is key to the economic development of the city. Competitiveness is critical. Their basic target is to halve the energy used per capita and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60%. They're well on the way to getting there. They're about 7 years into the plan. And their population is targeted to grow a little faster than yours, to 50% in that period of time, from 120,000 to 150,000, 180,000. And their goal is to absorb all that growth with no new energy requirement for the city. In other words, to grow the city with no new energy. And in fact, the target is to grow the city with actually a little bit less energy than today. Whenever you're making a good plan, you always follow, and this was formalized a few years ago, early 1980s, so-called loading order, in Europe called the Trias Energetica. We can't agree on language, so we ended up using Latin. Number one, energy efficiency is always your first priority. It's always the cheapest, and it's always the one that pays off the best, and it's always the one that is the most sustainable. Then heat recovery. We waste huge amounts of heat in our electric and industrial systems. If it's already there, you've already paid for the fuel, find a way to use it. Third one, focus on renewable energy, recognizing it's a moving target. If I take solar panels, 10 years ago, I was $8 to $10 a watt for a panel. Today, I'm $1 to $2, and I'll probably be under $1 within 12 months. In other words, what didn't work economically 10 years ago may work today. So one thing that's very important is to overcome the preconceptions, because you're in an industry where a lot of things are moving very quickly in terms of cost. Just on renewable, in the last 24 months in the world, more renewables have been added to the world's energy system than conventional. So in other words, now renewable is growing faster than conventional in terms of feeding global growth. So we are getting to the tipping point in that piece. And then last but not least, energy distribution, and I intentionally said energy, not electricity. Energy distribution, focus on how we can maximize the investments both the regions and the cities make in terms of energy distribution. This is the short version of the Guelph plan. Building efficiency will be above code and will apply to retrofits as well as to new construction. All buildings will have energy performance labels available anytime you rent them or sell them, so the buyer or the renter knows exactly what they're buying. Transport will be structured efficiently, and the first steps of that have already taken place with the integration of the bus and the train in the downtown. Small step, but a piece of the puzzle. Heat recovery and integration, including district heating. They have significantly more industry than you do, so they are absorbing some of their industrial dimension into their system. Significant clean and renewables, and they are restructuring their energy supply institutional structure as well. Important message at the bottom there, this should be an integrated solution, not a buffet. In other words, we can't pick the bits we like and then ignore the bits we don't like, because in the end it's a system and we are putting together a systemic infrastructure. So the challenge is how to manage multiple moving parts at the same time. But that's why we have strong elected leaders, because that's your talent, is managing multiple agendas at the same time and bringing them together to a common goal. The actual technical strategies are important, but also the governance strategies. So there are some very specific governance items taking place in terms of priorities, policy and planning, making sure energy is built into all of the city plans. Local utility structures are being reworked, and then the concept of the integrated information network, where gas, heat, electricity, water can all talk to each other, and you can begin to manage energy information or energy-like information on a communal level. And last but not least, holding everybody's feet to the fire and on a regular basis reporting progress and results at a community level. So you're rethinking integration not only technically, but you're also rethinking it institutionally. Just to give a little sense from Guelph, they're about 7 years down the road. They kind of went a little slow for a period of time, and now they're sort of putting their foot back on the accelerator. But even with the sort of, the reality of managing a complex process in the early stages, they can clearly identify 2,000 new jobs, which would probably not have come to the city without the plan. That's not insignificant. They're definitely having some influence on regional national policy. There are 2 or 3 major companies in the process of establishing their Canadian, in one case, North American headquarters in the city, simply because of the dynamic of the energy planning reputation. And it's a little old, this news clip, but it's from 2011. But it specifically identified the energy initiative as part of the contribution to the good employment figures. So let's move to Newmarket. This is roughly the energy used in Newmarket in the way a lot of us think about energy, which is the natural gas. That's gas as in natural gas, not petrol. That's gas is 40% of all the utility. We buy from the meter. Electricity, 45%. And then the vehicles owned and operated in the city, 11% gasoline, 3.84% diesel. That's the best information we have at the moment. It shows one thing immediately, that when we talk of utility, we have to think beyond electricity. In other words, there's a danger of always having an electrical conversation and forgetting it's actually all about all of the above. But this is the real picture, because that previous picture is the electricity at the meter, the gas at the meter, and the fuel at the pump. This includes the fuel that the electric utility used to make the electricity that came to our meter. In other words, the heat and the distribution losses between the nuclear power plant, the gas-fired power plant, and our meter. So actually, the consumers of Newmarket are using 190 gigajoules per person of fuel, not 112. And that's important because you're paying for the 190. You're using the 112, but you're paying for the 190. So if we break this down, this fuel use by sector, that's the energy we actually put into our homes. That's the energy we needed to get the energy to our homes. So in other words, our homes used all that energy, but inside our homes, that's the bit that we saw on the meter. So it's quite important when you think at a community level to go beyond the individual building consumption and the final meter, but think of how much fuel is the community responsible for when it conducts its activities. And that's what this picture is. This is our non-residential, and this is our non-residential conversion. Sorry, that's the end use, this is the conversion. Because non-residential tends to use more electricity than homes, which use more gas, we see a higher conversion ratio of conversion loss. So if we take the fuel we use in the city, in the town, 40% of it is actually conversion loss to get it to our buildings and our vehicles. That's something we can address at a community level that we cannot address at an individual building level, or it's much more difficult to address at an individual building level. Let's look at cost. We don't have accurate cost figures, so we've made a reasonable estimate, but I'm comfortable these are within 20%. And I should say on all the data, as this is in the public record, all the data is early draft and subject to revision. So in other words, indicatively, I don't see anything that makes me uncomfortable here, but the final numbers may be different from what you're seeing. So if we look at the energy cost, the town, which is 86,000 people, is spending $250 million on energy, 40% of which, in one sense or another, is wasted. That's before we get to the efficiency of the home and the efficiency of everything else. In other words, we're talking real money. The efficiency is real money. Then if we look at when we pay our utility bills, our gas bill and our electric bill, the vast majority of that value leaves the community. A very small amount is retained for the local employment. You are lucky to have your own electric utility, so that retains a lot of the distribution value, but very little of the generation value. So in other words, you have an opportunity not only to potentially reduce that $250 million, you have an opportunity to repatriate some of it and bring that value added into the town. In other words, this is an economic discussion as much and an economic development discussion as much as any environmental. This is our greenhouse gas emissions. We are a little, we believe there's undercounting, so I will put the flag up here and say that I think the final number will be higher. I think it will be closer to 8 metric tons per resident. But with the available data at the moment, roughly just over a third comes from residential and non-residential, and the balance comes from the use of vehicles owned in the city. And utility, it's almost equally spread between electricity and natural gas. That is very unusual, because in most jurisdictions, electricity is by far the biggest source of greenhouse gases because of the high use of fossil fuels, and credit to Ontario with the recent 4 or 5 years of policy in Ontario of shutting down coal plants, reinvigorating the gas and nuclear structure and getting some of the systemic efficiencies improved. Ontario actually has one of the lowest carbon grids anywhere in the world. It's been quite a success story if you stand back and look at the big picture. And that shows up here in the numbers. But that's something the community can't claim credit for, because that kind of happened at provincial level policy. Okay, we're in the process, and I just want to show this sort of a little bit of how we're going to the mapping. We are in the process of mapping the town. We have the data from the planning looking out to its evolution to 2031, about 25,000, I think there's 27,000 parcels. And there will be a year-by-year assessment of what building types dominate each parcel, including demolitions, renovation, and new construction. So in other words, best guess, parcel by parcel for the next 20 years. And in each of those, using generalized computer modeling, and we certainly don't have time to explain the process, we will estimate for each of those parcels the heating requirements, the cooling requirements, the lighting, and other power requirements of each of those parcels. This will allow us then to create heat maps, cooling maps, lighting maps, electricity maps, gas maps. In other words, you name the map, you can make the map by parcel, by year, from the baseline year, which is 2013, to the end game year, which is 2031. So this will then become a critical piece of, if I'm going to go for high density housing in a neighborhood, or if I'm looking at this or the other, I can not only look at it in terms of its land use, its effect on, stormwater, sewers, green space, parking. I can also look at its impact in terms of how it affects the energy flow across the town. It's what I call the missing Chapter 7 in most community general plans, that you sort of look through and you find wonderful plans for everything except energy. And this is now the opportunity, if you like, to create that missing Chapter 7. We have defined energy planning districts. We did it arbitrarily, but they were based on some logic. There will be 12 energy planning districts, which we're using for the data. District 10 is the employment, sort of in heavy commercial industrial. 12 is obviously the older downtown. 11 is the commercial strip. And then, and I apologize for probably not using the correct local terms, and then the 1 through 9 are predominantly residential neighborhoods with a very high predominance of single-family home and low-density multifamily homes. So in effect, we'll have 12 energy planning districts, and where, as close as we can, we've broken them out by characteristic commonality in the planning districts. Because it's parcel-based planning, those boundaries are arbitrary and can be reassigned in the future. In other words, if you say, I want my land use planning and my energy planning to be exact overlaps, It's just a case of moving the right parcels into the right files. So in other words, at the moment it's arbitrary for the purpose of the energy plan, but the data structure is flexible. So if we do nothing, let's assume Town of Newmarket says, we know it's important, but it's not our top 10, energy. It hasn't been a major problem in the past, so we're not going to make it a major issue in the future. What does business as usual look like? Roughly, energy use grows 28%. We assume new buildings will meet the new codes. By the way, Ontario now has some of the most efficient building codes in North America. As of 2012, Ontario had a building code more efficient than California's. Unfortunately, it only applies to new construction. And the vast majority of energy use, even 30 years from now, is going to come from buildings that are in existence today. So the renovation question is as important. The total energy cost in the lower range of risk goes from $250 million, 250 million to 450 million. It rises significantly faster than population, and that's the lower range of risk. In the higher range of risk, it could go as high as 674 million. And again, we don't have time in a presentation like this to explain all the risk factors. These are based on some pretty careful, independent assessments made very recently for Guelph, and they kindly allowed us to use the results in this, and there's no real reason to believe they'll be significantly different. The higher range, in fact, both of them include some cost of carbon. The lower range relatively modest, the higher range more aggressive. The greenhouse gas emissions grows a little less than population, thanks to slightly more efficient new buildings. And reliability may be good, may be bad, may be adequate, may be inadequate, but it will be entirely based on decisions made outside this council chamber. In other words, I'm not going to say it'll be poor reliability, it's just it'll be something over which you have no or minimal, the community has minimal influence. And we are in a world where reliability is becoming a challenge. So the key questions are, at this stage, should a plan go to world-class performance, which to a first approximation in Newmarket would mean halving the energy density? That would be typical, that would be the range. That would take you to a transformational plan, which means institutional change. It means major scale programs. It means, regular tracking, and there's many things that go with a transformational. Or would you go incremental? Best efforts, minimum policy changes. And is there a willingness to embrace the discomfort of scale strategies? Scale strategies are never comfortable because they're a break from the past. So there's that sort of, is there a community appetite for the scale strategies? And this is one of these graphs that you don't really like because it looks like it's quantitative, but it really isn't. But basically, if you take an incremental plan, they're very, very valuable, but they will generally achieve no more than about a 20% improvement in the overall energy productivity of a community over a multi-decade period. They require very few, if any, changes in policy. They are generally voluntary. They are generally driven by, I would say, positive dynamics and outreach, and less by policy change. If you're going transformative, very early in the game you have to take scale projects where you take an entire neighborhood. One city, for example, we took the entire historic residential neighborhood, 300 or 400 homes, and said, that's going to be step one to make sure we know where all the moving parts are for the scale residential strategy. Once we had that done, well, then you can move to the whole city, to the whole community. So the transformative tends to require some significant attacks on policy, even if it's policy in inverted commas, where it's done through aggressive persuasion and accepted norms. So it's a case of policy in all its terms. To give an example, this is Arlington, Virginia, which, by the way, Arlington did their plan based on the benchmark reference process from Ontario. They used Guelph as their benchmark. So this is the interesting thing where benchmarking sort of follows each other place. But you see here how important achieving large-scale efficiency, the district energy, the transportation, and the renewables, each piece is critical for them to meet the world-class target. And in their case, they set a world-class target based on, by 2050, being as good as Copenhagen today. So they basically set that as their target. This is Holland, Michigan. Similar climate, very different electricity structure. Their plan was approved less than 2 years ago. They are already working on 6 scale projects, which includes a large-scale energy system for an industrial park, downtown district heating, integration of the energy systems of a school, hospital, and sports center, a reconfiguration of a university campus, and the renovation of a major single-family neighborhood with the intention, this is the prototype, for the remaining single-family homes in the town. So this is a typical example of a community embracing the concept of transformation with early-scale projects. Just down the road, Oakville, you have a kind of a scale project. This is the 3 campuses, Mississauga, Oakville, and Brampton, of Sheridan. Their target is to get a 60% reduction in emissions. In their case, as a non-profit, at least a 7% return on recommended investments. They've approved $35 million. They're already starting on the campuses. And it is a fully integrated picture of efficiency, heat recovery, thermal distribution, and on-site electricity. Their target is not only to be an efficient college, but to be a North American center of excellence educating people on integrated energy solutions. So they are looking at it as a laboratory for their own product as much as an effort in efficiency. This is Guelph, and this is the district energy system. This is their downtown network, which they've started building. This is the industrial network, which they've started building. But then the long-range plan includes integrating the university network, some of their growth nodes, the northwest, the older industrial area, which is already starting, then another growth node, and ultimately to create, I won't go through each, to create a brand new utility across the entire city for heating and for cooling. So in other words, they're picking up on the benchmarking from cities like Copenhagen and saying, well, if we don't manage heat, we can never manage the total fuel efficiency of the community. We just have to find a way to do it. You can't do it all at once, but you've got to do it against a methodical plan in bite-sized pieces. So this is their structure. This is a benchmark in one of the benchmarks in Germany that was visited recently by both Arlington and Guelph. And you'll see here that we just picked up a nice little photograph from the equivalent of the community utility. And their phrase is all from one hand: electricity, natural gas, district heating, public pools, and EV chargers. In other words, they see the concept of utility well beyond the concept of electricity at a municipal level. All those products are profitable except the swimming pools. Surprise, surprise. This is a early stage picture of some of the institutional challenges that are being addressed in in Guelph to move to a new reality. The long-standing Guelph Hydroelectric Systems, the municipal utility, is now an affiliate under a new entity, Guelph Municipal Holdings, which was formed specifically for the purpose of implementing the Community Energy Initiative. And it has its own board structures. The board is a mix of community and elected leadership. And the target is at least 2 new utilities, one responsible for thermal and one responsible for energy efficiency as a utility delivery. It's an evolution at the moment. This is sort of an end game picture, but they're in the process of working their way through the institutional change. So when we look at the various successes, what do we see that make the common features? First, without community leadership, and that starts with the elected leadership without any question, the Chamber of Commerce, the environmental groups, the community groups, the neighborhood groups, without that sort of geist around the theme, it's very hard to make it move forward. Very good data and very good transparency and communication. Where successful, every community we've seen, and we're just seeing the beginning of this in some communities like Vancouver and Guelph, we see them becoming a magnet for investment beyond the immediate objectives of the plan, because the plan kind of brings in the right, attractive investors. Quality local employment, because there's a lot of local work needed to do in terms of the retrofitting, the planning, the upgrading, the building of new utilities. You create a lot of high quality work inside the community. So money that previously left the community as inefficiency is now coming back into the community as efficient infrastructure reconfiguring. There is no compromise on world-class efficiency. It should be measured, tracked, and put in place. Integration of the municipal utilities is in some way, and you see the Guelph example is the early stage of that. Other places you can see more advanced forms of that. Not being afraid of scale, even in the early stages, moving to scale. If you think of those 9 planning districts, well, pick one of them as your early scale. It's this sort of sense of don't be afraid of scale. And then as you get to being close to the targeting you thought you were going to achieve, like Copenhagen, I'm sure now, if they were in their fantasies in 1970, they would have they could not believe they are where they are today. They have just raised the bar again and said, now we're going to be the first net zero by 2025. But you only do it once you've developed the muscles to be able to put those credibility behind those targets. And then very consistent execution. If you win, there's a piece of value added of various forms for just about every major community. This summarizes, I would say, the key things we see when a community gets serious and effective about planning and implementing efficient energy solutions. I didn't quite keep to my promise of staying on the original timing, but I did stay on, at least I stayed under the block time.
Thank you. That's been very informative. I do see there are some questions of clarification. This is a great presentation and a very bold proposal for Council to consider. And in that context, it could be a very exciting project for us. Councillor Spong, questions of clarification?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Definitely, that was an incredible presentation.
Thank you.
So much bold and really mind-opening and eye-opening, but also very, very full of great information and background. So thank you so much. One of the best presentations I ever sat through. And interesting enough, I just finished reading a book, The Papers of Nikola Tesla.
Sorry, which one?
The Papers of Nikola Tesla. So I'm going to ask you a question. There's a difference between technology and progress. And you know that's not my quote. That's a quote actually from 1907 by Nikola Tesla. And basically coming up with new technology like the Industrial Revolution and so forth doesn't necessarily mean that we are progressing. Because if it does have a negative impact in our environment, in our economies, and our quality of life, it definitely is not progress. And I, too, had an opportunity during the 70s to drive with my parents one weekend with a car that had an even number on the license plate, and on weekends that it had an odd number in Europe when we were there through holidays and so forth. And you constantly touched on through your presentation on the incredible waste, up to almost 40% of the production supply chain. So bringing the energy to the end user, there's that 40% of waste getting there. So although I appreciate the fact that cities like Copenhagen have been able to put in place energy plans that have brought globally leading results. As you said in your presentation, it started somewhere around the 70s and during the energy crisis. So there was a cultural shift. And that cultural shift didn't occur simply by adopting some ideas, recognizing the problem and adopting ideas by the Council of Copenhagen. It was a cultural shift that engulfed the whole country and all of Europe by that point. So in terms of, and I can appreciate that we are the end users at the end, but doesn't that cultural shift, shouldn't that start, and those scale strategy, shouldn't that start at a national level?
Okay.
That's my first question. I got three of them.
Oh, okay.
Do you want all three of them, or do you want to go one at a time?
Are they related?
No.
Okay. One at a time.
Okay, yep. I actually have done quite a lot of work on what caused that shift in the direction, because there's no question the vector of energy policy in broadly the European Union has been different from the vector here, US and Canada, no question. And the vectors started diverging actually before the crisis. So I think the first thing that's important is don't say that you have to have a trigger event like the oil crisis. That happened to be a significant trigger event for Denmark, but that was a very localized thing. It actually started in the mid-60s. And it was based on three pressures. Environmentally, you had an appalling acid rain killing the forests of Germany and Sweden. And when you kill the forests, like killing the forest in Canada, you were killing part of the soul of the country in Sweden and Germany. So in other words, it was bigger than just a tree. You know, this was a piece of who we are. That was the first thing. Secondly, you had very inefficient national monopolies running the power and gas systems, which were very political, very technically inefficient, and it was very hard to run a fast-growing, this was the post-war boom, 1960s, very hard to run a growing economy with a very poorly structured energy supply system, which was highly political. Thirdly, so that was a reliability bubble. Thirdly, you were in the middle of the Cold War. You had used up all of your oil and gas for the last 100 years, or, well, most of your coal anyway, for the last 100 years from the Industrial Revolution. And all the good coal and all the good gas and all the good oil was in the hands of the Soviet Union, your mortal enemy, and you had 19 nations ready to shut the planet down. In other words, it was actually not about any one thing. It was about a confluence of regional risks. And it didn't take long for efficiency to be seen as the number one strategy.
National risks.
But hold on, if I may. Then, so everybody by the mid-60s was saying, yeah, we need to address this because of all the things I just said. Reality was nothing was happening. You didn't have European decision-making frameworks at that time. You didn't have post-war confidence high enough in Germany to be able to take national decisions, and. So, and you had a lot of, frankly, the incumbent energy supply structures didn't really want things to change because they were, along with the coal mines, dumb, fat and happy with yesterday's business model. And it was the cities that took control. So I would argue, if we believe there is a growing continental imperative, and I think there is a growing continental imperative in North America, the lesson from Europe is not you need a national consensus. The lesson from Europe is Malmö, Freiburg, Copenhagen, a handful of cities changed the equation, which ultimately became the platform for the regional policy. It wasn't the other way around.
Very good point.
And we have forgotten history.
Very good point.
In terms of your next questions, Councillor, I'm very mindful of the time and the questions that we're going to need to come to, and that is the performance, the questions that we have for discussion. So maybe for your next couple of questions.
Very
could
quickly,
be-
two
Yep.
questions, which
focused.
a great segue into my next question. Then, given the small geographic size of Newmarket and the reliance on neighboring communities, especially when it comes to industrial areas, because our industrial area is pretty much very limited, and we are dependent on industrial and economic development strategies by our neighbors. And the next boom of single-family construction or residential development is going to happen in our borders, not within necessarily the town of Newmarket. Then does it make sense that that our plan and a municipal energy plan should be done in conjunction perhaps with neighboring municipalities, adjoining municipalities, or N6, if not at a whole, well, of course at a regional level eventually, but that we should be working with our neighboring municipality to catch up. For example, there is a big industrial area just east of Woodbine. That it's prime for district heating, but it's outside of Newmarket, but I'm sure it impacts Newmarket to a large extent, especially in terms of GHC and so forth. So is that a strategy we should look into?
This may be a good question direct towards Mr. Ferguson, who's managing the municipal energy plan on a regional basis. Maybe some input there, Paul?
I'm not sure I fully heard the question, but I'll throw this at the York Integrated Resource Plan.
Yes.
Okay. You've got our conservation and demand management plan, you've got a regional integrated plan, and you're developing a municipal energy plan, along with some of the other municipalities in York Region, East Gwillimbury, Vaughan, Markham, I think Richmond Hill are the ones that are actually doing something right now. So over the course of the next couple of years, all those things start to fit together. So if there's a development happening, be it in East Gwillimbury, even as far away as anywhere within York Region, okay, all these pieces start to fit together as part of that integrated resource plan. And that's, so they're all a work in progress. Like when you see the York Region plan, that's looking out 10, 15, 20 years. This will be an iterative plan as well, looking out over that period of time. So they all start to, and then you'll have, I guess, some of the money available to make it happen coming from conservation and demand management plans, i.e. primarily the utility. So some of those things that you see in a municipal plan, that you see in the integrated resource plan for the region, that CDM plan, that, and ours is, give you a round number, it's $9 million over 5 years. That money will flow into some of the initiatives that you'll see in these other plans, if that's helpful.
So basically what you're saying is if we move forward in developing a community energy plan, our plan will have to be developed in such a way that it dovetails with the plans around us.
Can I just express an opinion here? This is an opinion unrelated to local dynamics, okay? But it's not an uncommon dynamic. We had exactly this discussion in Holland relative to Grand Rapids and Holland Township and so on. So majority of current planning activities are beginning to come together to a common conversation. There's no question you're beginning to see that happening. However, they are in many cases relatively narrow in scope, both in terms of scale and in terms of what they're attacking. If we think transportation, urban design, you know, we're in multi-decade infrastructure thinking when we talk about a real plan. But I think a lot of communities are recognizing the need to embrace a more holistic energy planning approach. If a community says, if you want to join my conversation, I'd love to have you, but I'm going to have my holistic conversation because that's what we need for our community, then I think by taking that stand, you will actually attract those neighbors. A great example here is potentially East Gwillimbury.
Right.
And it was, you know, I was involved with the team that developed their plan, and it's a very challenging plan, but it's still struggling to get traction in terms of scale implementation. If 2 or 3 communities in the neighborhood and one of them saying, we're really committed to do this, then you attract them. If you make it a gatekeeping where you say, unless I get 3 or 4 communities, I'm not going to move forward, then the danger is you end up with committee gatekeeping when nobody wants to go first.
Right.
So it's one of those, yes, the bigger the area, the more infrastructure you can bring together, the better. But if the cost of doing that is institutional paralysis and planning paralysis, then it's not worth it.
I would just add one more
I was
thing,
gonna
if I may. So there's sort of a number of, as everyone has said, there's a lot of new moving parts at the moment. There is a linkage for the regional resource plan to look at municipal energy plans and make the loop back. But those will be evolving plans. This will also be, as Peter said, this is your first version or first step into this. So there will be those evolutions that happen later. There's mechanisms through the ministry where all 8 of those communities who receive funding have a chance to talk to each other, the staff folks. So Megan White participates in those. So she knows what's happening in the other communities. And there are, you know, York Region's quite lucky actually, because Vaughan is in the midst of doing their plan, Markham is in the midst of theirs, East Gwillimbury's is done, and Newmarket. So there's 4 communities in York Region that are looking at those conversations and looking at ideas where there's alignment, but really trying to get their own community plan sorted as the first step.
Thank you. It would be helpful as well if you could just clarify that you'd mentioned earlier that there were 30 people that are on the stakeholder advisory group that are helping to develop this plan, and their responsibilities are beyond the municipality as well. Even though this is just a municipality, our own municipal energy plan, we are engaging other groups that go beyond that. Yeah. And maybe if you could just highlight some of those players, or Mr. Nethery, if you had the additional players. You talked
Sure.
about IESO.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So because it is a community-wide plan, so we have obviously representatives from the town. We have Jeff Fields from Newmarket Hydro is participating in that, and part of the team providing all the data that we need for the mapping side. We have gas utility participation. We have some developers. We have the hospital, school boards, chamber. Who am I missing?
York Region, did you say that?
York Region, so transportation, York Region, some of the renewable energy companies.
Industry, what was that
An
company you've
industry.
got?
Windfall Ecology.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a variety of groups that are either high energy users, the people who can help make decisions within their own organization so that we are moving on the same page and moving forward. So we're meeting with that group 6 times throughout the process to talk through each of those, in that chart that I'd shown, each of those elements of the plan.
No,
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was a great answer. Where I was looking for, it makes no sense. I mean, the air in EG and the air in Newmarket doesn't have a municipal boundary. So if we are going to look at, and I know there's the economics, but there's also the environmental side of it, we want to make sure that it's the same thing as plastic bags. It makes no sense banning a plastic bag in Newmarket if I can get it in Aurora.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can I suggest a tactical thing which is very often quite successful, that if a community makes a good, powerful, holistic energy plan and says, but wouldn't it be nice if that neighbouring industrial area was part of this piece of the puzzle?
Right.
Then often you can have a single topic cooperation without having to go to a complete jurisdictional cooperation.
Yeah.
So in other words, if there's a logical reason to reach over the boundary anyway, and it may be industrial integration or something like that, then it can become a single topic cooperation as opposed to, as I say, jurisdictional.
I
The
have
jurisdiction's always more complicated.
One more very quick question, and it's, you mentioned about Guelph going over and above the requirement, their building standards, now we're over above the building standards. And you're saying those apply to new construction. Two questions I have, and one question, but a two-part question. One is, how does the city of Guelph plan within their plan to deal with appeals in terms of the standards now that are higher than what is provided for in the building code, interior building code? Second is, you said that this only applies to new construction, not to retrofits. So are municipal energy plans structured, are there any municipal plans that are structured in such a way where there are incentives provided to see that conversion to retrofits as well?
Yep.
That's it.
I think I misspoke, or some things got combined together there. Very specifically in Guelph, they have a major focus on achieving high efficiencies in at least 80% of the existing housing stock. A major efficiencies is between a 20 and 30% improvement in the energy use, because you cannot achieve, in an established community like yours, you cannot achieve those kind of breakthrough goals without a significant piece of it coming from existing building stock, homes or buildings.
And I think when we get to the details of that, or we get a little deeper into the program, some of the approaches and the
And then I
incentives
think we're into the problem solving, but the
Yep.
answer is there is a programmatic approach as part of their implementation. In terms of new construction, wherever possible, encourage, but recognize in the end the legal jurisdiction is the province, not the community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bizans.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the presentation as well. I found it quite interesting, and something that I think increasingly we do need to be aware of the changing dynamics within energy supply, energy demand, and not only from the standpoint of competitiveness, but also because of needing to change behavior and reliance on energy sources that are non-renewable, and also given the challenge with global warming, which despite our very cold winter is in fact a reality, and it's not just a reality that's completely generated by human impact, but natural impact. So sometimes it's very difficult to fight Mother Nature, but we do need to look at ways in which we can mitigate what sometimes she does to us. A couple questions, though, that I had. One with respect to, I believe it was in Guelph, where you noted that they have a city-owned utility. Was that a utility that was formed directly as a result of this, or they already had a utility in place?
They have the Guelph Hydroelectric Systems, Inc., as a company, has been around for 100 years. So that's the electrical distribution utility, so similar to Newmarket. What they are adding, and it's now in the evolutionary stage, so it's not a done deal, so I have to be very careful, as I know this is, in the public space. They are adding the concept of other utilities to handle thermal products, to handle efficiency products. So in other words, services, I should say. So in other words, the goal is to build on what they already have. In other words, they already have a successful, as you do, a successful electric utility, municipally owned structure, build on that strength, and migrate it to the other pieces of the energy service infrastructure.
That would be very similar to our Newmarket Hydro Holdings. We have a holding company that owns our hydro company.
It would be
and,
very similar.
And so that provides us opportunities to get engaged in other areas if that's what our plan tells us we can do.
Yeah,
So
you
that-
have I mean, it's quite good in Ontario because you have the basic institutional legal framework to be able to move in that direction relatively easily if there's a community will to do it.
Okay. So that could provide us with an advantage, although I also understand that sometimes there's a philosophical debate about whether utility companies should also be engaging in conservation efforts, because it's almost like you're defeating the purpose of being sort of a profitable business entity.
If I define utility as the delivery of, at a community level, of affordable, reliable energy services fit for purpose, then efficiency is a utility. And the question then, and this is where it pays to look at other jurisdictions, and the Energy Services Directive of the European Union, which was, I believe, 2002 or 3, don't quote me on the year, very specifically addressed how do you institutionalize efficiency as a utility. So in other words, as long as you think utility is the supply of the electricity as opposed to the supply of the lighting, the minute I think of it as the supply of the lighting, not the supply of the gas, but the supply of the heating, then you go into a whole different set of business models.
In terms of the potential conflict of the commercial interests of a utility, maybe Mr. Ferguson can speak to that, because demand management is very specific part of the mandate that's provided by the Ontario Energy Board, is it not, Paul?
Yes, like we are required to do conservation programs. So that's in from the province, it's regulated through the Ontario Energy Board. And in the long-term energy plan, there's a 5-year framework called Conservation First. And we are required to deliver electricity conservation programs through that Conservation First initiative. We are also expected, and it's interesting that you're talking a more holistic approach, because going forward, we are expected to engage with at least the natural gas sector and possibly the municipal. It would be interesting to know that, or I find it interesting to know that one of the biggest electricity bills in York Region is water and wastewater management. It's a huge consumer of electricity. So the idea of the municipal energy plan being a very holistic approach, I find is refreshing in that it's doing just that. It looks at all the different elements, but we are held harmless for our conservation efforts. In other words, profitability and delivering conservation are mutually exclusive in Ontario. So we can deliver conservation without any concerns on profitability.
Okay, thank you.
In effect, at a provincial level, efficiency has been recognized as a utility. That's another way of saying the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. And just one more question. One of the key elements of the successful CEP implementation that you noted is community engagement. And certainly we have, I think it seems like we have a very well balanced and represented stakeholder advisory group. Can you speak to or offer any specific examples of other successful implementation in terms of what else they might have done to engage the community? Because it's a very complex issue that we're talking about with, as you've indicated, there's many moving parts. It's not just about doing this or doing that, but it's a holistic approach of many things, and sort of the concept of being able to develop scalable projects where you may be only starting in a particular area, but the idea be to test it and then scale it in other areas. And sometimes that's not easy to grasp from a public or community perspective. So can you offer, like, have there been examples that you could point to or direct us to where, you know, particular things in community engagement have resulted in helping to move the project forward?
I think Susan wants to make a
Yeah,
couple
I'll
of
start.
comments, and I've got a couple of examples.
It is a difficult challenge, I think. We do lots of community engagement work in the climate realm and in the energy realm. In this process, we had identified sort of 2 points where we'd like to go have conversations with the community. We've been talking to that advisory group around the timing. One is obviously when you have a draft plan, but that's really late in the process. So we want to do something a little earlier. The advice from the group was really once we have the baseline set, where we've got something that we can, that the community can chew on a bit, that number of, you know, what the cost of energy in your community, that's one that's shocking. So in London, they've used that sort of as the conversation starter, if you will, to get people just talking about how much money is spent on energy from a community level, and then what does that mean for your community. And they've positioned it around sort of the economic development side of the benefits, that how do we retain more of that within our community. So that's one example where they've reframed the question. I think that's the timing that we would like to, our next advisory group meeting actually will be talking about again. So what is the right timing to go and have that conversation now that we've got a fairly decent base case or baseline? We have a sense of what that would look like going forward. But I think London's done some good sort of communication. They use it as part of an ongoing conversation as they talk about all of the chapters of their plan. So they talk about the transportation lens, they talk about the energy lens, and they host a lot of the conversations in these bigger kind of platforms of what are all the moving parts that are happening in London.
Thank you.
I mean, you've highlighted one of the key things, one of the key challenges, and it's true of energy in general. I've done a lot of work in my life on industrial energy. In the end, it's like safety. If you walk into a safe factory, how do you know it's a safe factory? And you find a lot of the skills of communicating, you know, visualization, good data, making it readily available, mapping. People love maps. People love maps. If you can show the maps of the heating across a city and how it evolves over time, and then what the impact of last winter was, and you know, and once you get good data, and our energy systems generally have appalling data. You know, we haven't done a very good job collectively of getting data where it's digestible. But now it's getting, so that I think is one. There are a couple of cities which are very, very good role models for this. One is Stockholm, which has had an outstanding communication program over decades, and they haven't blinked. You know, it's still outstanding today as when they started it 20, 30 years ago. Another one is a city in actually industrial distressed region, Bottrop in the Ruhr Valley in Germany, which was designated as a national innovation city by Germany specifically on this topic of how do you engage a community who's probably got its other priorities somewhere else. You know, if you're in a city with a high unemployment and a collapsing major industry, you know, energy efficiency isn't first on your social agenda. And they have done an outstanding job of community information centers, physical centers, you know. They have engaged the commercial community very well. They've engaged the elected leadership. They constantly have little good news stories on the web, and, you know, Mr. Smith has done this and so on. So there's this, you know, constant reinforcement and visibility.
Thank you. This is a real challenge, and we're engaged in a very interesting and meaningful conversation, and we are running out of time. I still do have a couple of more speakers. Regional Councillor.
Thanks very much. Just thinking of my role in the committee and then in terms of liaison with council, I want to think about making sure council knows where the process is going and the touch points for them. And the one thing I want to highlight, of course, is that this plan has to come back for council approval for it to be active and meaningful and move forward in any kind of way. And so one thing I wanted to talk about, just because I think it needs to be, as you said there, which is that elephant in the room. And, you know, part of the decision we're going to have to make as approving a plan is how ambitious we're going to be. And what I'm wondering in that form, what kind, you know, we take on other plans. We took on a secondary plan and we asked staff to do some work around implementation and costing. We're working through a master fire plan right now, and we're trying to get a better sense of the costing of the plan on a multi-year basis. Will staff and the consultants together be presenting, let me just state, I accept that we can't afford to not act, but we can't necessarily afford to do everything either. And so finding our way through that, we'll need some assistance. So will there be some help along the way in terms of multi-year costing or budgeting and the role that the utility will play in that, and how we could see ourselves getting from A to Z? And secondly, a little bit of analysis on the financial front about community impact. So, for example, if Guelph went to a very progressive or ambitious built form requirements, is there any work that's been done there or elsewhere on how that affects take up, or, you know, did it affect the investment of the private sector because they saw their costs rising? I assume there would be a correlation, at least in the short term. I'm sure some energy savings in the long term would offset those. But so will we get an analysis of economic development analysis and et cetera of some of the policy changes that might be contemplated before we make a decision on pushing or on supporting those? And secondly, will we get some sort of sense of a multi-year costing and sourcing of how that will be paid for?
Go ahead.
At the level of a strategic municipal energy plan, it will not have a detailed budgetary output. That's beyond the scope. At the level of indicative value and indicative cost for the major recommended measures, absolutely, that would be included. And I just want to make a little bit of a comment back on the elephant. Generally speaking, it's more expensive to be timid. It's one of the, because if you look at, and I'll do a very rough, and please don't quote me on this in terms of any kind of final analysis, but if you say today the community is spending $250 million on energy, a 50% productivity gain would be well within the range of a global best practice set of targets. So first approximation, you are freeing up somewhere between $100 and $200 million a year. Remember, this is an annual saving as you mature. So you're mature, and let's assume you're looking at a 10% internal rate of return as your minimum acceptable for a non-profit, public environment. Then your affordability, if you are looking at, or your affordability for investments, if you're looking at a breakthrough target, gets you into the close to the $2 billion range fairly rapidly. And that's the kind of money that in a community this size is very realistically within the range of what's needed to deliver those kind of results. So in other words, the circular conversation starting from targets to affordability to, is that a rational kind of pool of money to achieve what you're trying to achieve? Recognizing the vast majority of strategic financing for these kind of things ultimately comes not from public revenue sources. It ultimately comes from private investment sources. So my caution is timidity is not the same as cheap.
Well, that's good.
Okay.
So the only comment.
That's a simple, simplistic.
And I see myself as a champion of this process, but And there's a but that comes with that, which is, as any member of council here, and I'm not saying this is the case at all, but I think we need to make sure it's clear, and if that requires some staff assistance outside of the consulting role to help us understand the impact.
Perfect.
I mean, a council doesn't necessarily want to sign on to a program that would institute a 4% increase in taxes year over year, right? So we have to make sure we have some clarity on those issues, and I think that that'll actually help it to become more possible. And the other thing I'd say is that you may not want to be timid, but at the same time, and I won't point fingers, but there's some plans that have been built out there that very little is being done on them, and maybe because it seems too challenging to take on. I don't know. Or there's some plans that were so aggressive that they're now political at each election time. And, stop, go, stop, go. And so thinking through that side of things, it doesn't matter how non-timid your plan is if it never gets moved on. So anyway, just some thoughts, and in general, some thinking that, again, this plan will have to come back here for approval, and some help in this council understanding all of those aspects of the financial sides.
Yeah, simple answer is, would the plan have a financial and affordability dimension in its output? Yes. Would it be a detailed investment grade plan? No.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Councillor Kerwin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I shall be brief, Peter and Susan. I thank you for your thoughtful presentation. And I will make a comment that we are lucky in Newmarket. We've had fantastic leadership in many things, whether it's Wi-Fi or transit or energy efficiency, from the top down, from our CAO to our mayor to our regional councillor to this council. It's an exemplary council as far as I'm concerned. There is no elephant in the room, Peter. I've lived and breathed conservation all of my life, but more particularly since I married my wife. You mentioned the word painful. At times it is painful to be efficient, regardless of whether it's the waste you put out or the wastewater you put down to be treated in the sewage system. However, the savings are enormous. Yes. I estimate that every year our family that lives at 317 Maple Street, regardless of whether my grandchildren are there or my kids are there, the savings is between $5,000 and $10,000 a year per family. That's enormous. That's using less gasoline in the car. You go from 2-car to 1-car. We don't put out any garbage. We haven't for years now. We put out no waste. It's all recycled. The only thing we use is a blue box. That's extremely limited. There are so many ways to conserve, so many ways to reach that objective. I used the example you used of Freiburg. I assume that's the Freiburg of Baden-Württemberg, the university city, and the outside is Vollberg, which was created to be a completely energy efficient city on the outside. Well, it's now part of Freiburg. And you're 100% correct. The forest is the soul of Germany, and they couldn't let it be destroyed. The same way in Sweden. It's a beautiful forest, and a beautiful forest all across Europe. And we will reach that. I believe you go from the individual up or from the top down. It really doesn't matter. But there is no elephant in the room. Good. Not at all, not in my mind. Excellent. So I thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank our regional councillor for taking on the lead role from the municipality's point of view and coordinating some of the advisory groups. There are a couple of questions that I had, and I'll be very brief, knowing that I'd like to take a 5-minute break before we get into our next discussion. But the innovation team and the IBM, Cisco, all of those groups have been very eager to get involved in some projects that involve big data and big data analysis. And are we engaging these individuals, the innovation team or IBM or Cisco, on some of these on this project? Have we considered that? And it might be something that could lead to some good breakthroughs as far as their contribution towards the project as well.
Well, I love the thought, because, I mean, I won't quote any particular company, but it sort of links a number of questions. question of outreach, the question of, integrated financial planning. There's many questions that need extremely good big data in quasi real time. And at the moment, we've got a long way to go. We talk about smart metering, then we look closely and it's only electricity. We don't talk about smart metering for gas or smart metering for water or smart metering for heat, and. So if we could engage, that could be one of your, let's say, competitive edges, that if as a community you said we're going to really focus on making sure we've got transparent, manageable, accurate, visual, communicable data, which ultimately becomes the platform for your control and management, that's an area where there's a lot of talking and very little acting at the moment, to be frank. There's one city I know, even if you go to the countries which we think of as a little bit ahead of the game, like Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, they're still struggling with the same issue. So I know one suburb of Mannheim is trying to get a fully integrated, information structure. So I think that is, I would say, a good thought.
Good. Thank you. I'll leave that with you, Regional Councillor, to have that conversation, and maybe that might relate well to the smart grid that Mr. Ferguson is working on. So, yes, you've given us some really interesting and some very exciting things to contemplate. I think what's really important is that this is a decadal plan. This is almost intergenerational. So we really need to make sure that we find some digestible bites that we can undertake to make sure that we start making progress on that. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more from the group, and appreciate the information that you've given to us. You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you very much. I'd entertain a motion to receive this presentation. Good. Presentation at the workshop. Councillor Bazans. Councillor Sponga? Okay. Yeah, we do have motions to receive at a workshop, do we not? Yes. Okay, could I have a seconder then to receive it? Councillor Sponga. All those in favor? That is carried. I'd like to take a 5-minute break before we invite our next presenters in. So maybe if we could all be back at 11:15. That'd be good. Thank you.
We did in a roundabout way.
Well, and they can't give direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, many things that we're doing, and it's got to be comprehensive. And we do have something called the N6, which is collaboration of the northern 6 municipalities of your region. Something I'll raise with them to see where they all are on it. Like, we know EG has a plan, how realistic it is.
They're all about that was almost a greenfield plan, basically.
We've gone through that.
And the village considered it was a small city, so it's okay, fine, but it was essentially a greenfield plan. Now, if
I'll just get them to the site.
Okay. He has a different type of laptop, so we just needed to get an adapter to connect it differently. Yeah, they were
Look, the last time we were here last year, these are the things that came to my attention was the development had to be of a high quality and a catalyst-free development on Davis. I believe we've met that with what I'm going to show you. The development of Hollingsworth and San Michael sites to be integrated. Now, in 2014, Dr. Lee was not part of the picture. So now we have another piece of land that we've assembled. So I'm going to show you that's actually 3 parcels that we're discussing. That time it needed to conform to the OPA.
I'm finding the music a bit distracting. Is there any way we could turn that down a bit?
So at that time, we needed to conform to the OPA, and I believe that we've done that. And there was a financial security component that had to be put in place to protect the town against default, and I believe we'd answer those questions. Mr. Mayor, you've brought that to my attention, and I believe today we're going to answer those questions fully. And the development needed to be combined and assured. So I believe we've done all those things, and this is the way we've done it. Basically, what we did is we aligned ourselves with certain people, and we formed certain relationships. And one of the relationships we formed, which was very key and important, was with Robert Friedman of Urban Solutions. So Robert Friedman, he was the head of the Planning Review Board for the City of Toronto for the last 10 years. The City of Toronto is very sophisticated with its development, one of the most sophisticated cities in the world. And he was very key in helping me produce something. And then from there, I also work closely with McCourt. They've opened up 2,000 sites. And they're a second-generation company, and also PMA is a second-generation firm. So very powerful firms behind us. And we've also worked closely with Harry Cohn to put this project together. And finally, I put you guys up there because I've worked closely with you also. So these are the inspirations. The first inspiration I had is in a building that exists, and it's very... it's a very good-looking building. That's actually what it really looks like. It's in Victoria, BC. And basically what I do is I just get different inspirations, and then I get my architectural team to put them together. So these are just a couple of slides of things that are appealing to me, and that's how I create our developments. I look at what's appealing, and I put it together. These are some high-rises that I like the look of. And what I also did is I looked at your official plan, and I respected that and looked at it, and I looked at urban squares and plazas, and I believe we've implemented that in the development. And finally, the last thing that was a big motivating tool for me was the Shops of Don Mills, because the history of the Shops is that was an outdoor mall, and then after a while it didn't do that well, so they made it an indoor mall, and then after that they created the outdoor-indoor type of feel, and it's been very, very successful. So to give you an idea where the site is, it's actually located in the heart of Newmarket. And we're just going to zone in on it a little closer and see exactly where it is. It's directly across from the hospital. And when you look at it, there's 3 components that have put this project together. One of them is our land, which is the corner. Then it's the town's land. And then finally, Dr. Lee's land was really... He was an inspiration that allowed me to create something different than some of you might not have seen. So the final result is this, but it's hard to understand what that is, so we're just going to show you what it looks like in a movie format. We're going to try to do that again. So this is what it would look like. Basically, we've got a town square in the middle. Shops. There's 2 parkettes, townhomes. And the goal of this was to meet the density requirements that are appropriate with your new official plan. So that's kind of our objective, where through the density transfer component, we'd be able to achieve the density for intensification that's very needed in the town of Newmarket. We like the transition here where it goes from your single-family homes and it transitions from townhomes, and then from there it goes up to the taller buildings. So it seems to be a nice, appropriate transition for this type of a development. giving you a different video than we showed you last time, just to show you what would it be like from the north to the south. We haven't figured out the details yet of the park. That's something that would have to we'd have to take some time figuring out what the park would really look like at the end of the day. But we're coming close to something we think would really work. We use the shops of Don Mills as a sample of what we'd like to achieve. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So to complement our team and to finish things off, we also are using Brookfield Multiplex. You've mentioned to me, Mr. Taylor, that, and I listened to you, that we should partner up with somebody. So I'll give you an idea of who Brookfield is. Go through these slides. These are the buildings, all the buildings they've built in Sydney, and then going from there in Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane, Dubai, London, Toronto. He just came to Toronto recently, and I'd like to invite Neil from Brookfield to come on up and just say a few words.
My name is Neil Vora. I'm a director with Brookfield Multiplex. And just to preface it a little bit, I got to know Sandro probably about a month ago. We had a couple of discussions with regards to the development here in Newmarket, and the leadership at Brookfield thought that this is a very, very interesting project, a very, very interesting client, and something that is quite inspiring for this town, I think. And I think if we can pull it through, it will be a fantastic addition to Newmarket and to our portfolio here in Canada as well. Just to give you a bit of a history of Brookfield Multiplex, we are 100% owned by Brookfield Asset Management. We've been in Canada for 5 years, since 2010, although we're 100% Canadian owned. We are operational in many countries around the world, but our focus now is developing our business here in Canada, because this is where we are now owned. Our projects in Ontario, they range from 12 million to 200 million in value. And we've got a workbook currently in Ontario of $1 billion. Our focus is really on mixed-use developments, so residential, commercial, institutional developments. And we are a boutique contractor, so we're a construction company, but our focus is really on boutique projects. So go to the next slide. To give you an example of the boutique projects I'm talking about, this is one example of a project we're building in Toronto. It's a mixed-use development. It's a retail component at the bottom and a hotel that rises from Exhibition Place. This is for a New York private developer, and it's currently about 75% finished, completed at the moment. It is scheduled for completion in early next year. This one here is, the construction cost is about $160 million, construction management contract. Go to the next one. These are some of the Canadian projects that we're building here in Ontario. The first one on the left is a hospital, a small hospital in Scarborough. We're also doing Queen's University student residences, and these are student residences for a private developer in Kingston. We're also doing another student residence in Toronto at the University of Toronto at College and Spadina. And we also work on commercial properties, such as the Deloitte corporate headquarter fit-out and the Bay Adelaide East Tower. We're also doing Core Condos, which is a condominium development in the east end of Toronto. And our first project in Toronto is the Trump Tower. Next slide. Which is basically this one I wanted to put up here, because this was the first project that we undertook when we came here to Toronto. We took it over in distress in 2011 from a current construction manager, and we basically built it, met target and budget, and the client was extremely happy with us, and became a landmark in Toronto. So that just gives a sort of a brief overview of Brookfield Multiplex and who we are, and we're extremely excited to be working with St. Michael and the town of Newmarket. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions you may have after this full presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so the next slide we're looking at is the schedule that we've put together. And basically what that schedule shows is we've got some target dates here where we feel comfortable meeting these dates, that by December of 2017, the townhomes would be occupied. The town square would be complete by October 2018. And the first tower would be complete by 2018 of December. So there's a couple of more people that we've included in our team that have helped us do this and are going to help us do this. And one of them, for example, is HBR Planning, which I'm sure you people are very well aware of who they are. One company you might not know is Robbins Appleby, and that's a very accredited legal firm, and you need the proper legal advice of a project of this nature. And then finally, excuse me, Dr. Lee was a big part of, as I mentioned before, he not only wants to work in this project, but live in this project. He's been here since 1973, and he just loves this plan. He wants to be part of it, and he's all in. These are a few other relationships that we've developed along the way. We have a great relationship with Terrion. We've got a long-standing relationship with the RBC, the Laurentian Bank. All Group Financial is a company that I helped fund that right now manages $1 billion in assets. KingSett, we have a personal relationship with them. They're a very, very successful, strong company. Same with Fortress. Hillmount Capital, we're involved with them even now. Bahar Group was a big inspiration to me when we were doing the Benson, and nobody believed in it, and we set the stage there, and we were the pioneers, and we made it happen. And you talk to Yossi, and he's like the only one that believed in us, but we made it. We did it. We did it in Richmond Hill. We were groundbreakers there. One of the developers there that has 3 towers that's built, one building is building 2. He was just waiting for us to see what would happen. But we did it, and we made it happen. So I want to talk now about defining and managing the risk. What if scenario? What if prior to closing the conditions are not met? What if closing occurs but the construction does not begin? How about if the construction begins but the townhomes are not completed? Town square is not completed or the first tower is not completed. These are all very valid questions, and I believe I've got an answer where we've mitigated the risk and we've eliminated the risk by the deal that we put together. So prior to closing, if the conditions aren't met, well, you're going to keep our deposit. Beyond that, let's say the closing occurs, but the construction does not begin. Well, then you keep $100,000 plus $1.2 million, and you get to keep the land. Then we look at 3, construction begins, but the townhomes are not completed. We structured the deal so that the only way we can get occupancy permits, which would mean the only way we can release money, get money for ourselves after we spent millions of dollars, is that you would have to release these occupancy permits to us. So that's your protection. And also you still have a mortgage on title. Now, number 4, what if the town square is not completed? At a certain time in the schedule, we will also provide a $1 million letter of credit, which if we don't meet that target, you keep the $1 million and do what you want. And then from there, the 5th thing is the first tower is not completed, you still have the letter of credit. Now, one thing I want to bring to your attention, like I said before, Toronto is a very, very sophisticated city. The lenders we're going to use, this is the way it works. We sign everything over to them, everything. And if we can't complete this project, I guarantee you, it will get completed. So all that we have to worry about is, will I be able to get funded? Will I get someone to say, yes, I'm going to commit to $130 million because that's what it will cost to build this. And if I can do that, then I guarantee it will be built, whether I build it, which I'd love to build it, or someone else builds it, because there's not one building in Toronto of this size that is vacant. You'll find that in Aruba, but you won't find it in Toronto. So there is a level of sophistication here that goes beyond myself and us. And once we get that commitment, it'll be out of your hands and my hands if things don't go well. It'll get done. There's no doubt. So there's some questions I had to answer. Is this the right location? Well, the high-speed transit system is at the doorstep. It's directly across from South Lake Hospital. It's 2 blocks away from the GO station. It's around the corner from Main Street and in the heart of Newmarket. So I believe beyond a doubt the only reason I'm here after 3 years, and we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to be here, is because this is in the right location. There's no doubt in my mind. Not only my mind, but all the people that I've engaged to look at this very closely. How will it impact the town? Let's look at it. After this development is complete, there will be $1 million that will come in as annual income, not including that I'm going to buy the land and not including that there's going to be development charges, et cetera, et cetera. So not including all that, let's put that aside. Every year, from that moment forward, will be $1 million that this development will create. It will contribute to the usage of the high-speed transit system, which is very needed because it's going to be complete soon, but you also need people to use it, I believe. It meets the objectives of places to grow. And it will be the driving force behind new development. So let's have a closer look at what this square will do, the town square, and what we've designed. If you look at it really closely, there's a mistake up there. The 55,000 square feet is actually a mistake. That should be about 37. But the percentage is correct. The open space that's available today that you could use at the arena is about 63,000 square feet. That's all that's really available. The rest is parking lot and arena. So the grass is about 63,000. Our open space is going to be 60% of that space, so you're almost not losing any open space whatsoever, but here's what you're getting. This will serve as an urban stage, a celebration of life, with spaces for events, exhibitions, and gatherings. And during the winter months, we're going to have a nice rink there as a tribute to kind of the arena. And people of all ages will interact and form lifelong connections. So this is going to be a very interactive development as opposed to what exists today. So what about the local residents? Because that's an important question. Well, there will be a public engagement process. And developers nowadays are much more sophisticated than they used to be. It's not the developer coming into town and muscling around and doing things like that. Actually, this public engagement process has been developed and used by McCoot many, many times. It's a great selling tool. So where the developer used to hide, the developers don't hide. They come into the forefront, they engage the community, they talk to people, they get input, and they make it happen. And it works really, really well. Those residents become our fans, and they become our purchasers. So things have really changed the way the way developers interact with communities, with people, and we're more than willing to do that because it's an important process, and it will ensure the success of this development. My objective, my objective is to revitalize and to be the heart and soul of the neighborhood. That's what my objective is, and I believe we've achieved it. There will be a perfect transition from existing low-rise homes that exist today. Design will create a genuine, identifiable, and enduring neighborhood. That's been in the back of my mind of something that I've wanted to create. And yeah, I believe they will love it. There's not even a doubt in my mind. They'll love it. So that's my presentation, and I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation and your passion for the project as continuing to be building some momentum. Questions of clarification, Councillor Twinney?
I guess I just sort of a clarification just to ensure that as the public knows that this is all landing on whether we sell the arena or not, and that decision hasn't been made yet, and it's sort of I just want to ensure that that part hasn't been put into place yet, and at some point I guess later on I'm going to ask that we what maybe through our staff what the next steps are. I know what they are, but perhaps through a public so that the public knows. And I guess my only comment is, I know you did mention, Mr. Semintelli, about the process of public engagement process, which I think absolutely, I'm glad you say that. But I think it's important that perhaps we have that prior to us making as a council a decision on selling Hollingsworth Arena. I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Sheldon, perhaps in terms of the opportunities for public engagement throughout the process, or perhaps Mr. Nethery?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments, if I may. First off, there's a closed session, as I indicated, this afternoon. It's part of the formal committee of the whole meeting, and it fits under the Municipal Act dealing with the potential disposition of land. So that would be the time when there would be discussion about what the value is, what the offer is, that sort of thing. The council would have the opportunity to ask some questions. Going into that session, there is the opportunity to, in the open forum of the Committee of the Whole meeting, to again just sort of set out the history of this and where we are so that the public does know that the disposition of property is something that Council is considering. I have asked our municipal solicitor to be prepared this afternoon just to set out the process in terms of the declaration of a piece of municipal land as surplus, what that looks like in terms of public input. And I don't know if the solicitor is able to do that now or this afternoon or at both meetings, but we could cover that. And then we have engaged Bob Webb of Bob Webb and Company to assist us in this process. There will be discussion about the process going forward depending on the direction that we receive from Council in closed session this afternoon. So, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you'd like to get some initial comments from our solicitor and perhaps a plan.
We have different viewers this afternoon than we have now, so maybe if our municipal solicitor could give us an update there.
And I would suggest that perhaps Mr. Nethery could speak to the planning process as well.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. At this point, there has not yet been a recommendation to declare these lands surplus, but under the town's sale of land policy, we do have a number of steps that will have to be taken if that is the route that council chooses to go. Before any disposition of land occurs, the land shall be declared surplus by council. Typically, staff would come in with a recommendation that council would declare the land surplus, and there would be a discussion around that, and council will make that decision whether the land should be declared surplus. Surplus lands means that the town does not need that land to meet its present or anticipated future needs. So that will be one of the considerations around whether to declare surplus or not. At least one appraisal is required, and sometimes more than one appraisal if there's any issue about the value, whether it's the value based on the current use designations of the property or the value based on the proposed use of the property. Something else that council will need to consider is the method by which the property would be disposed if council determines that it should be surplus. So the method could be by way of discussion with one owner. It could be by way of listing the property for sale on the MLS so that it's publicly available for anyone to purchase, or it could be by way of a group. So if there are other potential developers or others that may be interested in the kind of development that's being proposed, that may also be a consideration by council. And finally, if and when all of those conditions are met, the notice of proposed disposition would be made public. So that is generally by way of notice in the newspaper, notice on the town's website, and then there's an opportunity for the public to comment on that. In terms of, we don't have any road issues, and when I say road issues, sometimes there may be an unopened road allowance that would require an additional step, but I don't see any of that in this case. So those are generally the steps that would have to be followed have the lands declared surplus and then move to the next step of disposition.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Twinney?
Just to follow up with that, Esther. So you're saying that the public will be informed prior to us making a decision on the sale of that land, or after?
Madam Solicitor.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a very good question. The notice is prior to the sale, so typically the council would direct that the town move forward in terms of an agreement of purchase and sale, but that agreement would be conditional on satisfying the notice requirements. So notice will be given to the public prior to any finalization of that sale.
Thank you. Regional Councillor.
Thanks very much. I think that staff can comment though, but I would think it is appropriate to this form that we just have a little bit of an explanation about options for Hollingsworth and arena usage, et cetera. I mean, that question's probably beyond some people's minds already, and I think we should address that, that there's options that could be considered in that area.
Mr. Sheldon?
Mr. Mayor, so that is absolutely a consideration of part of this, and I'm going to ask the Commissioner for Community Services and the Director of Recreation and Culture to comment on discussions that have taken place to date, and also the current status, if you like, of Hollingsworth Arena.
Thank you. Mr. McDougall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to the Regional Council. Councillor, Hollingsworth Arena, as we all know, is part of our current inventory of 7 ice services servicing the community. It is a necessary asset for programming purposes. That being said, it is nearing closer to the end of its serviceable life, and so it does present a future question in terms of council, in terms of whether it was to maintain the same level of service to the community, and if so, at some point now or in the future, how it was going to be able to address that in order to continue to provide that level of service. So right now, as it's programmed today, we have 1 ice surface municipally for approximately every 12,000 residents, which is in keeping with close to what would be considered to be a provincial standard. As we go forward into the future, and this will come out through the recreation playbook process, the community is changing. It's going to grow certainly population-wise, but it's also growing with enhanced ethnic diversity, and as well, the population is aging. So it will very likely in the playbook process be the staff recommendation that we do not, as we look forward into the future, anticipate additional ice services beyond the current service level of 7, although it would also seem prudent to maintain the level of ice at the 7 ice services that we currently have. Today in Hollingsworth, it's booked. It's a prime time facility, booked about 85% of the time. Our overall ice inventory is booked around 86% or so of the time for prime time. So there's certainly a lot of community demand. If we were to lose the 7th ice surface, we would certainly be in a position where we would be going to community-based user groups, in particular youth-based groups, and indicating that they would have to change the way they program and likely change the level of service that they could provide to the community. That would be a service level reduction. So again, our position is that the 7 ice services is the right number for the community. That being said, with Hollingsworth nearing the end of its serviceable life, we're looking at options for council to consider. We have explored a couple of scenarios. One right now is looking at a potential partnership with Pickering College. We've met with them on a couple of occasions. They're comfortable with us indicating that we are in some preliminary discussions with them. They too are in a situation where they have an asset that's an ice arena that is very near the end of its serviceable life. So they are also at a point in time when they are looking to decide how they are going to proceed. So there may be the potential for a real win-win for both the town and Pickering College, but as well ultimately for the residents from a financial perspective, potentially, as well as just from a service level continuance perspective. So that is, again, that is one conversation that's happening. The other option or options would be to consider increasing the town's ice offerings through potentially adding an additional ice surface at Ray Twinney Complex, or some new location entirely. But we wouldn't necessarily recommend building a town standalone single pad arena elsewhere. The Pickering scenario with a single pad arena is attractive in that it maximizes the programming opportunity where they need it daytime, we need it prime time. So it really does bode well from a business case perspective, at least based on very preliminary estimates. But for us to build a new standalone arena elsewhere, that kind of bucks the trend of what's happening in recreation service delivery. It tends to be twinned or a multiplex environment just for efficiencies. So hopefully that helps to paint the picture a little bit.
Thank you. So it's understood that we will need to explore options before anything gets finalized. Councillor Twinney?
No, I'm still.
Regional Councillor, go
Thank
ahead.
you. Yeah, so I just want to say also that I think as this idea moves from the conceptual to a decision point, that it's important that we have this conversation, this public conversation. It gives an opportunity for the community to contact members of council and provide input and ask questions. And so I think this is an important step. I will say, though, that it's important and also recognize that, as Councillor Twinney has pointed out, no decisions have been made of any nature. There's been discussions and conversations, but conceptual of nature. So there's some decisions to be made. I will add, though, to that I do think that with places to grow and legislation and our secondary plan and the Viva investment in Davis Drive, this is what we were, to a degree, expecting to see is proposals like this coming forward. And we've seen some other ones in town that perhaps aren't moving forward. So I will say that it's good to be approached. It's good that people are excited about our community, and it's good to know that there's potential for housing options for our community, for young people, for seniors, et cetera, that are potentially there. Now, as they always say, it's about the details. So now we've got to see if there's something workable in terms of our facility needs, if there's something that that council wants to support. I think we need to consider the interface with the community heavily and see and look at that, and then to consider risk mitigation. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but it's exciting to know that people are looking to Newmarket to invest and to provide options, and so I look forward to their conversation. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Twinney.
Thank you. I agree. I mean, I think it's an exciting project. I'm just not sure that, and we spoke, and I've told you my concerns is whether, it should be at the sake of us selling a municipally owned property that's been a recreational facility as it stands now. And maybe, I guess my conversation would be more around too is, as a council, we haven't had the opportunity to discuss perhaps other ways that land could be used if it's not an arena, even if it's still in municipal hands. So those are my concerns, and my concerns are, I think, around the fact that I don't feel like the public is really knowledgeable only of what's going on, only through what I've been able to tell them through my ward meetings and through my e-letters, but not through a town wide perspective, through the corporation itself sending out those notices. So I guess, I'm just concerned about putting the cart before the horse and the optics of what the town, the residents in that area who have known that, had their children walk to, play sports there, et cetera, are going to, see in the future. So those are my concerns, and I guess, I am going to be asking, this is a workshop, we're not making any decisions here, it's not a formal but I will be asking that the discussions around the arena will be, that we will hold them as an open forum, not in a closed meeting this afternoon. I hope that I'll get support for that. So those are just some of my concerns, is that how we approach this and the best way of informing the community that, what's going on. And you know what? It's the best way is for them to know. And so if they think it's a great opportunity and love it, then so be it, that allows them to do so. And that's and then that way, we know where they stand. So.
And I think this is an important part, is the fact that this is a public workshop, and it is also being live streamed. So it's a good opportunity for the community to have an understanding of what the discussions are about, and then so this is a good start in terms of the overall process. I have Councillor Bazans, Councillor Kerwin, and Councillor Hempin. Councillor Bazans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question is for the Commissioner. Perhaps it would help a little bit to frame the context of part of the discussion around disposition of the arena, to understand what you mean when you say that it's coming to the end of its serviceable life. Does that imply that, you know, regardless of any other discussion or decision, that in 2 years' time we would be looking at having to completely upgrade in order to keep this as an arena? Or, I mean, I have some very, very fond memories of 6 a.m. hockey practices with my son in that arena, so there's a lot of sentimental attachment to that. But, you know, I'd like to understand that context as well, and I think it might be important as well for the public to sort of get a sense of even if this issue hadn't come before us, what we might be looking at in terms of the serviceability of that arena.
Mr. McDougall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, first of all, it's certainly encouraging to know that 6 a.m. practices eventually turn into fond memories, because right now, for me, they're still, you know, still catching up with 6 a.m. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So in regards to the arena, there has been some, as minimal as can be done in terms of capital improvements to the facility, and knowing that it is getting into its later stages of life. It is still a serviceable facility, so I don't want to be at all misleading in that regard. It serves the needs of the community, and it is, I believe, over 40 years old now, so it's again, it's a lot closer to the end of its life than the beginning. But could it continue on a year-by-year basis? Certainly. So it's not like it's an imminent, you know, as you suggested, as an example, 2 years. It's not in a situation like that where it is imminent. But given the fact that council may consider a development opportunity, and knowing the age of the facility, and knowing that the 7 ice surfaces is what would be the recommended go forward for the community, if there is an alignment, so that there can be that win-win win for the community in terms of a development, economic development catalyst, continuance of deliverance of service, but albeit in a newer facility, and the financial numbers all align. That's where we think that there may be a potential convergence. But it's not being driven by Hollingsworth at the end of its life today.
Thank you. Councillor Kerwin.
Just a couple of questions on stats, and I asked the Commissioner, Mr. McDougall, again. What year was the Magna Centre completed, fully completed, and up for operational?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Magna Centre opened August of 2007, at which time there was, if Council recalls, the need to come back and report on the programming of Hollingsworth. I believe it was a year after its opening, which staff had done, and it did at that time validate the need for the continuance of the 7th ice pad.
Good. In 2007, approximately what was the population of Newmarket? Anyone can give that, Rick? Just approximately.
2007, it would have been probably in the high 70s.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so we know what the population is today, 2015. We just saw it. It's roughly 86,000. In 2007, what was the enrollment of Newmarket minor hockey? Totally.
Through Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't have that.
I think we need those figures, and I want to look at the enrollment today of Newmarket minor hockey. I think it's down to about 1,600. There's been a sizable growth in population within the town, but a sizable drop in the enrollment of Newmarket Minor Hockey Association. Okay.
Councillor, maybe
those are just figures that when we move forward, I think we have to know that. Mm-hmm. Because when I go out to Brampton and I go out to Mississauga, where my granddaughters live, I see a sizable shift in the demographics and ethnicity of those particular areas, and I see a sizable shift in the sports. They're playing cricket out there, and it's a very simple game to play. I see the enrollment of soccer jumping to over 5,000 in the Newmarket Minor Soccer Association. So I think when we move forward, I think those are those are figures and facts and demographics and so forth that we all must consider. Thank you very much.
And it's all part of what's being considered through the playbook and how we're going forward with that. Yep. Yep. And again, those options need to be presented when we have to get to a decision point. Councillor Hempel.
Thank you. I also have some great memories of that arena. I used to play hockey when I was 8 years old there and walk for early morning practice along Patterson and play there as well. So we know that rink has been there a long time. So part of my decision making would be understanding costs of replacing that surface in its current location. That's something I think is very important for all of us to understand. I do have a question from the presenter from Brookfield. I'm wondering, thank you for your presentation, both of you actually. Has your company been engaged in some kind of written contract with the proponent to be the construction manager or developer, or what's your relationship? And if you have a contract in place in a written form?
Yes, we do.
And
we have a written agreement which was signed on Friday.
Okay, and what would your relationship be in this project if you were to?
So we're providing St. Michael with pre-construction and pre-development services, or development services, development management services, with the idea that this will be converted into a construction management contract. And there is a clause in the agreement that states that.
Could you give me an explanation? I'm not sure if you can give me a little more detail, what your relationship would actually be. Is it in the design phase? Is it following it all through on the construction management phase? I'm not a planner and
Sure.
not a developer, so if you could give me that information, it would be helpful to me.
So we'll be assisting with the selection of all the other design consultants, with the management of the processes to be put in place for the development to take place, to be assisting St. Michael with municipal approvals, if obviously there's going to be quite a few, with permits associated with construction design at a later stage, estimating, scheduling, logistics at this stage, at the design stage. Once we formalize the construction contract, which, as I said, there is a clause in the current pre-construction agreement to convert into, then the construction management activities will take place, such as a selection of subcontractors, tendering out contracts to subcontractors, and the actual building of the building.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more question or two more questions. You have quite the resume and the buildings that your company's actually built, which is quite impressive. My question to you is there some type of financial commitment? We see that there's going to be a proposal for some deposits, some financial commitment. Is your company standing behind those financial commitments as well? Or are you part of that? Or
we are not funders, although we are owned by Brookfield Asset Management, which is an asset manager with $200 billion worth of assets under management, Canadian-based. We have a sister company called Brookfield Financial, who are basically debt advisors, debt arrangers, and real estate investment bank. So I've mentioned to St. Michael that we could put them in touch with Brookfield Financial, our sister company, to raise any debt if necessary. As far as Brookfield Multiplex is concerned, we're purely a construction company, so we don't have an equity stake in a project per se. We just provide construction and pre-development services.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. We've undertaken a couple of projects that we've seen, and those projects have come forward, and our planning departments and our building departments have worked with proponents who've come forward with significant projects. And those projects come to a point where we're giving approvals, and those developments don't happen immediately. And my concern is that we're being asked to be making some significant decisions on municipally owned lands. And if the intention is that we're going to see a development happen, I want to know where we have sureties and that takes place. And perhaps those discussions will take place later. But it's a serious matter for me as a council member. making decisions, that there are strong assurities in place that development will actually happen if this, if council makes decisions.
Thank you. That may be an element of discussion this afternoon. Councillor Vague.
Thank you very much. Actually, Councillor Hempton made one of the points I was concerned about too. That if we're going forward in some sort of assistance process with this, that the development will actually happen. That we have had occasions where developments got stalled, and there's one that's actually up for sale right now, where we work closely with the proponent. Everybody's mentioned Hollingsworth Arena. I grew up on Huron Heights. I'm a graduate of Huron Heights Secondary School. It's very sentimental, and I think Councillor Hempton, you played hockey there with my brother, actually. And actually, one of the things about Hollingsworth Arena, about 10 years ago, I believe we had the concrete floor there replaced. So maybe going back a bit before your time, but remember my son was playing there, and I had an Olympic loonie signed by Martin Brodeur placed in the concrete there by center ice. So if we do go forward with this, can I get it back?
Yeah, you want your loonie back. Huh?
Whoever finds it is great, but I'm just telling you that there is one there. But
put it in the contract.
Regardless of the proposal, and we do know we're getting information on our recreation playbook, and this is just assurance for the public, because quite frankly, I'm hearing some things, reading some things on social media, that if the town needs 7 ice services, as we spoke about, even if we go forward with this, it wouldn't go forward without an assurance that we do have a 7th ice. We're not actually looking at cutting back our recreational facilities and opportunities on something like this. So you mentioned that if we need 7 ice services, we're going to ensure that they're available, and whether they're town-owned or partnership with others, that's pretty relevant to the users. You know, it's kind of what we need to do to ensure that it happens. But I really would just want to assure the public that we're not going to be taking anything away if we don't have the if we have a need for it, if we don't have the opportunity to replace it. So and also looking at the timing of that. I know you have your timing, but it may not be our timing on that, and we certainly aren't looking to have any gap in ice time available for our public.
Thank you. Good. Mr. McDougall, did you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Vey, that's a very good point, and it is one of the complexities of this, but it is certainly you know, our staff position at this point that it would be incredibly difficult for a community-based, volunteer-based sport user group to have to scale back its programming and then ramp it back up again. So we would be looking at enabling a continuity of service delivery in some way, shape, or form, so that it can continue on as it has in the past.
Okay, thank you. There being no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor Vague, Councillor Kerwin, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then I'll have a motion to adjourn so that we can reconvene at 1:30. Motion adjourned. Councillor Vague, Regional Councillor, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. There you go.